Most people looked at the waitress behind the counter at Donnie's diner and saw nobody. Just a girl in a grease-stained apron scraping gum off tables for minimum wage. But Lorenzo Moretti, the most feared man in Chicago's underworld, made the biggest mistake of his life that Tuesday night. He thought he could bully her. He thought he could buy her fear. He challenged her to a fight, thinking it would be a humiliating lesson for a servant who spoke out of turn. He didn't know he wasn't staring at a waitress. He was staring at the Viper, a ruthless underground boxing prodigy who had vanished 3 years ago. And she wasn't just ready to fight. She was ready to destroy him. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside Donnie's diner on West 4th, the air smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. It was 11 p.m., the graveyard shift, and Bea Corbett was scraping a hardened patch of mustard off table 4. Bea was 24, with messy brown hair tied back in a utilitarian bun and eyes the color of cold steel. She kept her head down. That was the rule she had lived by for the last 3 years. Head down, mouth shut, don't make a fist. The bell above the door jingled, but it wasn't a gentle sound. It was aggressive, followed by the heavy thud of expensive leather boots. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. The 2 truck drivers in the corner booth stopped chewing. The short order cook, Old Man Jenkins, froze with his spatula mid-air. Lorenzo Moretti had entered the building. Lorenzo wasn't just a mobster. He was royalty in this part of the city. Tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his bespoke charcoal suit, he moved with the arrogant fluidity of a predator who knew no one carried a bigger gun. He was accompanied by 2 bodyguards, Rocco, slab of muscle with no neck, and Benny, a nervous man who always checked the exits. Lorenzo slid into the best booth, the red vinyl creaking under his weight. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at Bea. "Coffee," Lorenzo said. His voice was a low rumble, like a luxury car idling. "Black. And tell the old man to make me a steak, rare. If it's medium rare, I'm feeding it to him." Bea didn't flinch. She finished wiping table 4, tossed the rag into her bucket, and walked over. "Kitchen's closed for hot food, Sarag. All food. Tak de burveg to till for her dough." Rocco, the bodyguard, stood up halfway. "You know who you're talking to, girl?" "I know the kitchen closes at 10:30, Bea said, her voice flat. "It's 11:05. Lorenzo held up a hand to silence Rocco. He turned his dark eyes onto Bea. He was handsome in a terrifying way, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that only added to his allure. He wasn't used to hearing the word no, especially not from women in diners that smelled like bleach. "Open it," Lorenzo softly. "For me." "I can't," Bea said, clicking her pen. "Insurance policy. Ovens go off. Gas gets cut. I can get you cherry pie." Lorenzo laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry and sharp. He reached out, his hand moving with blinding speed, and grabbed Bea's wrist. It was a test, a subtle intimidation tactic. He squeezed just enough to hurt, waiting for the flinch, waiting for the "I'm sorry, Mr. Mertetti." But Bea didn't pull away. She didn't tight pilot autopilot. In a fraction of a second, she shifted her weight, dropped her center of gravity, and rotated her wrist against his thumb, the weakest point of the grip. It was a classic escape maneuver, executed with the precision of a surgeon. Lorenzo's hand was thrown off. Silence slammed into the diner. Lorenzo looked at his own hand, then back at her. He wasn't angry yet. He was stunned. That wasn't the move of a waitress. That was the move of a fighter. "You got good reflexes," Lorenzo said, his eyes narrowing. He stood up, towering over her. "Where'd you learn that?" "Self-defense class at the Y," Bea lied smoothly. "Sherry pie or not?" Lorenzo stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and gun oil. "I don't think so. You moved your feet. You pivoted. That's ring work." He looked around the diner, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He was bored. He had just come from a business meeting that went south, and he needed to vent some aggression. He needed entertainment. Then "I have a gym downtown," Lorenzo announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Iron Pit. Tomorrow night, I'm hosting a little exhibition. I need a sparring partner. Bea stared at him. I'm busy. I'll pay you, Lorenzo said. $5,000 for 3 rounds unless you're scared the self-defense class won't hold up against a real man. Rocco snookered. She's shaking, boss. Bea wasn't shaking. She was vibrating with suppressed rage. $5,000. That was 4 months of rent. It was the money she needed to get her little brother Toby out of the debt he'd racked up with the wrong loan sharks. But stepping back into a ring, she swore she never would. Not after what happened in Vegas. Lorenzo saw the hesitation. He leaned in, whispering in her ear, "Or I can buy this diner, fire everyone here and bulldoze it for a parking lot. Your choice, sweetheart." Bea looked at old man Jenkins, who looked terrified. She looked at the scuff marks on the floor. She looked at the scuff marks on the floor. She looked up at Lorenzo, her eyes burning. 10,000, she said. Cash, in the ring, before the bell rings. Lorenzo blinked, then he grinned. A wolfish, predatory grin. Done. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Wear shorts. I'd hate to ruin that pretty apron. He threw a $100 bill on the table for the coffee he never got and walked out. Bea stood there, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at her hands. They were steady. You just agreed to fight the King of Chicago, she thought. You idiot. But Lorenzo Moretti didn't know who he had just invited into his house. He thought he was fighting a waitress. He didn't know he was fighting Beatrix the Viper Corbett, the former Golden Gloves champion who had once knocked a woman out cold in 14 seconds, News traveled fast in the underworld, faster than a bullet. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the rumor was everywhere. Lorenzo Moretti is fighting a waitress. It was the joke of the town. In the back rooms of gambling dens in the VIP sections of high-end clubs like the Sapphire Room, the wise guys were laughing. He's lost it, whispered Tony Toes Russo, a rival underboss. He's bored. He's going to toy Russo, a rival underboss. He's pathetic. But inside the penthouse office of Moretti Enterprises, Lorenzo wasn't laughing. He was sitting behind his mahogany desk, reviewing security footage from the diner. He had the clip on a loop. Grab, pivot, break, play it again, Lorenzo commanded. Dominic, his head of security, clicked the mouse. Look at her feet, Lorenzo said, pointing at the screen. See that? She steps in before she rotates. She cuts the angle. That's southpaw behavior. Left-handed stance, Dominic frowned. Boss, she's a waitress. Maybe she watched some YouTube videos. No. Lorenzo stood up, pacing toward the window with the other gray skyline. I've boxed my whole life, Dom. Dom, my father put gloves on me before I could walk. You can't fake muscle memory. Who is she? Dominic looked at his tablet. Beatrix Corbett, 24, moved here 3 years ago from Nevada. Works at the diner, lives in a walk-up on the south side. No criminal record, no debts, clean. Nevada Lorenzo Murma? Maybe you want me to dig deeper. Deep as you can. I want to know who I'm getting in the ring with. Lorenzo paused, checking his reflection in the glass. He wasn't worried about losing. That was impossible. He was 6'2", 220 pounds of lean muscle, and trained 3 times a week with ex-pros. She was maybe 5'7", 130 pounds wet, but he was intrigued. And for a man who had everything, intrigue was the most expensive drug of all. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit basement apartment, Bea was digging through a dusty trunk she kept under her bed. She pulled out a pair of worn red leather boxing gloves. The name VIPer was stitched in gold thread on the wrist, though the gold was fading. Bea! She spun around. Her younger brother Toby was standing in the doorway, looking pale. He was 19 and had the anxious look of a kid who knew he was in trouble. I heard, Toby said, his voice shaking. People are talking about it on the street. You're fighting Moretti. Are you insane? He's a killer, Bea. He doesn't play sports, he plays for blood. He's paying 10 grand, Toby, Bea said, turning back to the gloves. She slipped one on. It felt like coming home. It felt like a curse. That clears your debt with the Irish mob. And it pays rent for a year. I don't want you to get hurt for me, Toby pleaded. Not again. Bea closed her eyes. Flashbacks hit her, the bright lights of the MGM Grand, the roar of the crowd, the sickening crack of her opponent's jaw, the stretcher, the silence. She had walked away from a title shot because she had almost killed a girl in the ring. She had too much rage. She didn't know how to stop. "I won't get hurt," Bea said quietly. She turned to her brother, and for a second, the tired waitress was gone. In her place was something cold and dangerous. "Toby, he's expecting a slap fight. He's expecting me to cry." She punched her open palm. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. He has no idea what's coming. The Iron Pit was less of a gym and more of a coliseum. Located in a converted warehouse in the meatpacking district, it was where the syndicate settled disputes that didn't require guns. By 7:30 p.m., the place was packed. It wasn't the usual gym crowd. It was men in suits, women in evening gowns, and heavy hitters from the underworld. It was a spectacle. Lorenzo stood in the center of the ring wearing black boxing trunks and no shirt. His body was a map of violent scars from knives, bullets, and wire. He was shadow boxing, his movements crisp and terrifyingly powerful. Every time he threw a hook, the air hissed. The crowd cheered. They were there to see the lion eat. Then the doors opened. Bea walked in. She wasn't wearing a robe. She was wearing cheap gray sweatpants and a black tank top. Her hair was braided tight against her scalp. She carried her own gloves. No entourage, no music, just Toby walking nervously behind her carrying a water bottle. The crowd went silent, then a few chuckles broke out. "Look at her," someone jeered. "She looks like she's here to clean the mats." Lorenzo stopped moving. He leaned against the ropes, watching her walk down the aisle. He expected her to look terrified. He expected her to look at the crowd, overwhelmed by the hundreds of dangerous people. She didn't look at the crowd. She stared straight at him. Her eyes were dead. She climbed through the ropes. Lorenzo walked to the center. The referee, a man on Lorenzo's payroll, stood between them. "Rules are simple," Lorenzo said, his voice amplified by the silence. 3 rounds, 3 minutes each. No biting, no kicking. Everything else? He smirked. "Protect yourself at all times." "Where's the money?" Bea asked. Lorenzo pointed to a metal briefcase in the corner, held by Dominic. "Right there. Win or lose, you get it. But if you last 3 rounds, I'll double it." The crowd gasped. $20,000. But Lorenzo added, his voice dropping an octave so only she could hear. "If I knock you out, you belong to me. You work for me, not at the diner. For me." It was a trap. Bea knew it. "Touch gloves," the reef shouted. "Make O-ring." "The touch gloves," the reef shouted. Lorenzo extended his gloves. Bea tapped them hard. Ding! The bell rang. Lorenzo came out fast, throwing a lazy left jab, expecting her to flinch. He just wanted to see how she moved. Bea didn't back up. She slipped her head 2 inches to the right, letting the glove sail past her ear. Lorenzo threw a right cross hard this time. Bea ducked under it with a weave so smooth it looked like she was made of water. She popped up on his blind side. She didn't punch. She just stood there, waiting. Lorenzo spun around, his eyes wide. The crowd went quiet. The waitress wasn't running. "Come on," Bea whispered. "Is that all you got, tough guy?" Lorenzo's face darkened. The playful mood vanished. He planted his feet and threw a vicious combination left hook, right uppercut. These were knockout punches. Bea parried part her forearm, absorbed the impact, and pivoted away from the uppercut. Then she fired pot. A stiff jab straight down the pipe. Its stiff jab straight down the pipe. It landed square on Lorenzo's nose. His head snapped back. Blood trickled instantly. The crowd gasped in unison. Lorenzo touched his nose. He looked at the blood on his glove. He looked at the waitress. For the first time in 10 years, Lorenzo Moretti felt pain in the ring. And for the first time in his life, he looked at a woman and felt actual fear mixed with a dark, burning desire. The game was on. The iron pit was heavy, suffocating. The drop of blood from Lorenzo's nose hit the canvas, a bright red period at the end of his arrogance. Lorenzo wiped his nose with the back of his glove, smearing the crimson across his cheek. He didn't look angry anymore. The smirk was gone. In its place was a cold, calculating focus. He realized now this wasn't a game. He was in a cage with something dangerous. "You got a good jab," Lorenzo grunted, circling to his right. "Let's see how you take a hit." He charged. This time there was no laziness. He moved like a freight train, cutting off the ring, using his 90-pound weight advantage to bully her into the corner. He threw a left hook to the body, intended to break ribs. Bia saw it coming. She clamped her elbow down, blocking the shot, but the force of it shuddered through her entire skeleton. He was strong, inhumanly strong. If he connected with her jaw, she wouldn't just wake up in a hospital. She might not wake up at all. "Move," her mind screamed. "Stick and move." Bea pushed off the ropes, sliding under a wild overhand right. She was in the pocket now, close range. This was where matches were won or lost in blood. She fired a 3-punch combination, uppercut to the solar plexus, hook to the liver, pivot out, thud huash. Lorenzo grunted as the air left his lungs. He tried to grab her to clinch, to use his wrestling strength, but she was already gone, bouncing on her toes in the center of the ring. Round 1 ended, the timekeeper yelled, slamming the hammer on the bell. Bea walked to her corner. She didn't sit. She stood, breathing rhythmically through her nose. Toby was there with the water bottle, his hands shaking so hard he spilled half of it on her boots. "Bea, you're bleeding," Toby whispered. She touched her cheek. A graze from the laces of Lorenzo's glove had opened a small cut. She didn't feel it. The adrenaline was a drug she had been clean from for 3 years, and now she was overdosing. "I'm fine," she said, staring across the ring. In the opposite corner, Dominic was wiping Lorenzo's face. "Boss, stop playing. You want me to call it? We can just shoot the place up if you want. Touch her and I'll kill you," Lorenzo snapped. "To Post, we came to shoot the place up if you want. Touch her and I'll kill you," Lorenzo snapped, to Post, spitting into a bucket. "This is the most fun I've had in 5 years." The bell rang for round 2. He stopped headhunting. He started attacking her arms and shoulders, hammering away at her guard. He was trying to deaden her limbs. It was a smart, brutal strategy. Bea felt her arms growing heavy. Every block felt like catching a falling brick. With 30 seconds left in the round, Lorenzo caught her. A looping right hand clipped her temple. Flashbulbs popped in Bea's vision. Her legs turned to jelly. She stumbled back. The crowd roared, "Finish her, boss!" Lorenzo smelled blood. He lunged in for the kill shot, but he made a mistake. He got greedy. He wound up for a haymaker, dropping his left hand just an inch, and that was all Bea needed. Her training took over the muscle memory of 1,000 sparring sessions in the sweaty gyms of Las Vegas. She slipped the punch by a hair's breadth and unleashed a counter left cross. It was the punch that had won her the Golden Gloves. It traveled in a straight line, fueled by the rotation of her hips and the desperation of her poverty. Crack. It landed flush on Lorenzo's jaw. The Mafia boss's eyes rolled back. His knees buckled. He crashed face first onto the canvas with the grace of a felled oak tree. The gym went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The referee was too stunned to count. Bea stood over him, her chest heaving. She waited. Lorenzo groaned. He shook his head, pushing himself up on shaky arms. He was groggy, but he was tough. He made it to his feet at the count of 8. He looked at her, his eyes glassy, but focusing. He wasn't furious. He was impressed. He nodded, a small gesture of respect. The bell rang, ending the round. "Enough," Lorenzo said, waving off the referee. He walked to the center of the ring, still unsteady. "Fight's over," the crowd murmured, confused. Lorenzo looked at Dominic. "Give her the money." Dominic hesitated. "Boss, there's still 1 round. You can take her." "I said, give her the money." Lorenzo roared, his voice echoing off the metal rafters. "She dropped me. Nobody drops me. She won." Lorenzo turned to Bea. His face was bruising rapidly, his nose swollen, his lips split. He looked like a wreck, but he grinned. "You're not a waitress," he said, stepping close enough that she could smell the copper of his blood. "Who are you?" "Just someone who needed the cash," Bea said, grabbing the towel from Toby. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just wanted to leave before the adrenaline wore off and the fear set in. She took the metal briefcase from a scowling Dominic. It was heavy. $20,000. Thank you, Mr. Moretti, she said stiffly. Don't thank me yet, Lorenzo called out as she climbed through the ropes. This isn't over. You just became the most interesting thing in Chicago. And I always keep what I find interesting. Bea didn't look back. She grabbed Toby's arm and marched out of the gym, leaving a room full of gangsters staring at her back in disbelief. The adrenaline crash came 2 hours later. Bea sat on the floor of her tiny bathroom, counting the stacks of cash with trembling hands. 20,000. It was enough to pay off the Irish mobsters, pay the back rent, and maybe buy a used car so she didn't have to take the bus at 2 a.m. But she couldn't stop shaking. She had exposed herself. For 3 years, she had been a ghost. She wore baggy clothes, spoke in a mumble, and avoided eye contact. She had successfully killed the Viper. But tonight, the Viper had come screaming back to life, and she had done it in front of the one man in Chicago who had the resources to dig up every skeleton in her closet. Bae, Toby knocked on the door. You okay? I paid the guys. They were surprised. They said we clear. Good, Bea said, her voice hollow. Pack a bag, Toby. What? What? We have to leave tonight. Why? Why? You won. He paid you. We're rich. Bea. Mia. Lorenzo Moretti isn't a philanthropist, Toby. He's a predator. He's gonna look into me. And when he finds out who I am, he's going to realize I'm worth a lot more than a waitress. But it was already too late. At the Mortetti penthouse, Lorenzo was icing his jaw while Dada Morton the waitress. But it was already too double onto the waitress. Took me 3 hours and a call to a contact in the Nevada Gaming Commission, Dominic said. Her name isn't Bea Corbett, it's Beatrix Kincaid. Lorenzo stared at the photo on the screen. It was Bea, 3 years younger, wearing a championship belt, her arms raised in victory. She looked fierce, untouchable. The Viper, Lorenzo read the headline aloud. Undefeated rising star van tragedy in the ring. Keep reading, Dominic said grimly. Lorenzo scrolled down. On May 12, 2022, Beatrix Kincaid defended her title against challenger Nina Rodriguez. In the 4th round, Kincaid delivered a knockout blow that resulted in Rodriguez suffering a severe brain hemorrhage. Rodriguez remains in a permanent vegetative state. Kincaid vacated her title the next day and disappeared. Lorenzo sat back, the ice pack dripping onto his chest. It made sense now, the hesitation in her eyes, the way she pulled her punches until she had no choice. She wasn't fighting him, she was fighting the memory of the woman she destroyed. She's a killer who's afraid to kill, Lorenzo mused. She's a liability, Dominic argued. She humiliated you, boss. The other families are going to talk. We should. We should? What? Lorenzo shot him a glare that could freeze water. Clip her? No. You don't destroy a masterpiece just because it cut you. Lorenzo stood up, ignoring the throbbing pain in his head. She's trying to run, Lorenzo said suddenly. She knows I'll find this. Get the car. Where are we going? To the south side, before she disappears again. Bea was stuffing clothes into a duffel bag when the front door of her apartment was kicked in. It wasn't a tactical breach. It was a singular powerful boot that shattered the lock. Bea spun around, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter. Toby screamed and scrambled behind the sofa. Lorenzo Moretti stood in the doorway. He was wearing a fresh suit, but his face was swollen, purple, and blue bruising blooming across his jaw. He filled the small, shabby room with his presence. Behind him, Rocco and Benny blocked the hallway. Going somewhere? Lorenzo asked, stepping over the splintered wood. Stay back, Bea warned, holding the knife. I'm not fighting you again. Put the knife down, Peterkin. Put the knife down, beat again. Put the knife down, beat again. Put the knife down, Feedikins, Lorenzo said, using her real name. The sound of it made her freeze. She lowered the blades slowly. You found out, she whispered. I did. Nina Rodriguez, Vegas, 2022. Toby poked his head up. What is he talking about, Bea? Shut up, Toby, she snapped. She looked at Lorenzo, her eyes filling with tears she refused to shed. So what now? You gonna blackmail me? Turn me in? What I did wasn't a crime. It was a sanctioned bout. It was a sanctioned bout. It was a sanctioned prom. It was a sanctioned bout. It was an accident. I know, Lorenzo said softly. He walked closer, ignoring the knife she still gripped white-knuckled. He stopped inches from her. I'm not here to blackmail you. I'm here to offer you a job. I don't work for mobsters. You do now. I don't work for mobsters. You do now. Because you have a problem you don't know about yet. Lorenzo pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket pocket and tossed it on the table. It was the Chicago Tribune, but it was tomorrow's edition, an advance copy. On the front page was a grainy photo taken inside the gym tonight. It showed Bea standing over a fallen Lorenzo. Mystery Wom folders, Dendes Troti Luzens Krupti. On Norris Tour of the Tron, Russier, the paparazzi have eyes everywhere, Lorenzo said. That photo hits the stands in 6 hours. Every lowlife, every hitman, and every promoter in the country is going to see it. You defeated a Mafia don. You think you can just go back to waiting tables? You think you can just leave town? Lorenzo leaned in, his voice dark and serious. You just put a target on your back, the size of Texas. People will come to challenge you to make a name. My enemies will come for you to get to me. You're in the game, Alfiper. Whether you like it or not. Bea looked at the photo. She felt the blood drain from her face. She had thought winning the money would solve her problems. Instead, it had just started a war. What do you want? She asked. Protection, Lorenzo said. Protection, Lorenzo said. Protection, Lorenzo said. I provide it. For you and your brother, you live in one of my safe houses. You get security. And in exchange, Lorenzo touched the bruise on his jaw, a flash of heat in his eyes. And when the time is right, you fight for me. A week later, Bea's life had changed so drastically it felt like a hallucination. She and Toby were moved into a penthouse suite at the Moretti Towers. It was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking Lake Michigan. Toby was in heaven, ordering room service and playing video games on a TV the size of a billboard. Bea, however, felt like a prisoner. She spent her mornings in Lorenzo's private gym-o state-of-the-art facility on the top floor. True to their deal, she was training him. Elbows in! Bea shouted, slapping Lorenzo's ribs with a focus mitt. You telegraph your right hook. A blind man could see it coming. Lorenzo grunted, correcting his stance. He was sweating, his shirt clinging to his muscular frame. He was a quick learner, and he was relentless. The dynamic between them was shifting. In the gym, she was the boss. She yelled, she critiqued, she hit him, and he took it. He listened. Outside the gym, he was the boss. She yelled. He showered her with gifts, dresses, jewelry, rare books. She refused them all, which only seemed to make him try harder. Why do you do this? She asked him one evening as they stood on the balcony, watching the city lights. They were sharing a bottle of wine, the first time she had let her guard down enough to drink with him. Do what? Lorenzo asked, leaning against the railing. The gifts? The protection. You don't owe me anything. I punched you in the face. Lorenzo chuckled. Maybe that's why. Most people kiss my ring. You tried to break my jaw. It's refreshing. He turned to her, his expression serious. And because I see something in you, Beatrix, you're broken, like me. We both have blood on our hands that we can't wash off. Bea looked away. I crippled an innocent girl. And I've killed men who had families, Lorenzo said calmly. We don't get redemption, Bea. We just get survival. He reached out, his fingers crazing her hand. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. She shouldn't feel this. He was a criminal. He was dangerous. But he was also the only person who saw the real her and didn't flinch. Just as the moment became heavy with unsaid words, Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his face hardened into a mask of stone. The warmth vanished. We have a problem, he said. 20 minutes later, they were in Lorenzo's office. Dominic was there, Tonic was there, looking pale. Who is it? Victor Valenti, Dominic said, the head of the West Side Cartel. Bea knew the name. Valenti was Lorenzo's biggest rival. They had been in a cold war for years. What does he want? Bea asked. He doesn't want anything from me, Lorenzo said, looking at her with a mix of anger and fear. He wants you. Lorenzo turned the laptop screen toward her. It was a video message. A man with slicked back hair and a cruel smile sat in a velvet chair. Victor Valenti. Lorenzo, my old friend, Valenti purred. I saw the papers. The waitress who knocked you down. Very impressive. I did some digging. Beatrix Kincaid, the Viper. I was a big fan of hers in Vegas. I actually lost 50 grand on the fight where she cracked that poor girl's skull. Valenti leaned into the camera. I have a proposition. My champion, the butcher, you know him, 250 pounds of Russian steroid muscle, is looking for a fight. I challenge you, Lorenzo. Your Viper against my butcher. 1 month from now. Underground rules. If she wins, I give you the shipping routes on the docks, the ones we've been fighting over for a decade. But if she loses, or if you refuse, then I release the location of her brother, Toby. Yes, I know he likes to visit that arcade on 5th Street. It would be a shame if he had an accident. The video cut to black. Bea felt the room spin. He knows where Toby is. He's bluffing, Dominic said. Toby is in the safe house. He was, Bea whispered, horror dawning on her. He snuck out an hour ago. He said he wanted pizza. I didn't stop him. Lorenzo slammed his fist onto the desk, cracking the wood. Find the boy, now! But the phone rang again. It wasn't a video this time. It was a live call. Lorenzo put it on speaker. Hello, Bea. Toby's voice was high and terrified. Then came the sound of a slap and a gruff laugh. Then came the sound of a slap and a gruff laugh. Then came the sound of a slap and a gruff laugh. He's with us now, sweetheart. Valenti's voice oozed through the speaker. The deal stands. You fight the butcher in 4 weeks, or I send Toby back to you in pieces, 1 piece at a time. The line went dead. Bea dropped to her knees, a guttural sound of anguish escaping her throat. Lorenzo moved instantly. He knelt beside her, grabbing her shoulder, sound of anguish escaping her throat. Lorenzo moved instantly. He knelt beside her, grabbing her shoulders. Look at me, he commanded. Beatrix, look at me. He looked up hard at Wild, Lorenzo vowed. The demon was back in his eyes, the ruthless Mafia dawn. But we have to play his game for now. Valenti won't kill him as long as he thinks the fight is happening. Toby is his insurance. The butcher, Bea whispered. I've heard of him. He's a heavyweight. He kills people in underground bouts. Lorenzo, he's twice my size. I know, Lorenzo said. He pulled her to her feet. That's why you're not going to train like a boxer anymore. He walked to the wall, unlocking a cabinet to reveal a row of knives and tactical gear. Valenti said underground rules, Lorenzo said coldly. That means no referee, no rounds, no mercy. You're not training for a match, Bea. You're training for a war. He turned to her, his hand extending. We save your brother together, but you have to trust me completely. Can you do that? Bea wiped her tears. She thought of Toby, terrified in some dark basement. She thought of the guilt that had haunted her for 3 years. And then she looked at Lorenzo, the monster who was willing to become her monster. She took his hand. Let's kill them, she said. The next 4 weeks were a descent into hell. Lorenzo didn't train Bea at the Iron Pit. That was too public. Instead, he took her to a private estate upstate, a secluded cabin surrounded by snow-covered pines. It was beautiful, but there was no peace there, only pain. The training was unlike anything Bea had experienced in her professional career. Boxing was a sport. It had rules, a referee, a doctor on standby. What Lorenzo was teaching her was how to dismantle a human being. He's going to be on steroids, Lorenzo told her on the second day. He was wrapping her hands with duct tape instead of gauze. It hit harder. He won't feel pain like a normal man. You can't just stun him. You have to break the mechanics of his body. You have to snap tendons. You have to crush the throat. Bea practiced on heavy bags filled with wet sand until her knuckles were raw and bleeding. She learned to slip a punch, not to score points, but to get close enough to drive an elbow into the temple. She learned to fight off her back, to use the environment. to fight dirty, but the physical toll was nothing compared to the psychological warfare. Every night, Valenti sent a photo of Toby. Sometimes he was bruised, sometimes he was bruised. It was designed to break her, to make her frantic and sloppy. One night, 3 days before the fight, Bea crumbled. She sat on the porch of the cabin, the freezing wind biting her skin, sobbing into her hands. The guilt was a physical weight crushing her lungs. Lorenzo found her there. He didn't say a word. He sat beside her, wrapping his heavy wool coat around her trembling shoulders. "I can't do it," she whispered. "If I lose, Toby dies. If I win, I become a murderer. I become like you." Lorenzo turned her face to his. His eyes, usually so hard and guarded, were open, vulnerable. "You are nothing like me, Beatrix," he said intensely. "I chose this life because I wanted power. You are doing this out of love. That makes you dangerous in a way I can never be. It makes you unstoppable." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "And you won't be alone. I have men stationed everywhere." The moment that bell rings, or whatever signal Valenti uses, Dominic has orders to locate Toby's signal. "We are going to burn Valenti's empire to the ground." He kissed her then. It wasn't a gentle, romance novel kiss. It was desperate and fierce, a seal on a blood pact. In that moment, Bea realized she wasn't just fighting for Toby anymore. She was fighting for the man holding her. She was fighting for a future where they didn't have to run. The night of the fight arrived with the weight of a funeral. The venue was an abandoned meat packing plant on the outskirts of the city. The air inside was freezing, smelling of rust and old copper. A makeshift ring had been set up in the center, surrounded by chain-link fences. It was a cage. Hundreds of the underworld's worst criminals were there. The air was thick, with cigar smoke and the scent of expensive liquor. Lorenzo walked in with He wore a tuxedo, looking every inch the Don. Bea wore black combat gear, tight leggings, a rash guard, and lightweight wrestling boots. Her hair was braided tight. Her face was a mask of stone. "There he is," Lorenzo whispered. On the far side of the cage stood Victor Valenti, smiling like a shark. Next to him was the butcher. Ivan the Butcher Volkov was a giant. He stood 6'6" and weighed nearly 280 pounds of slab muscle. His skin was pale, covered in prison tattoos. He was pacing, twitching, his eyes dilated. He was high on something, probably a mix of adrenaline and amphetamines. "Where is he?" Bea demanded, stepping up to the wire. "Where is my brother?" Valenti snapped his fingers. 2 thugs dragged Toby out from a side room. He was bound and gagged, looking thin and terrified, but alive. They forced him to his knees just outside the cage. "He watches from the front row." Valenti laughed. "I want him to see his sister fail." Lorenzo gripped Bea's shoulder. "Dominant is tracking the guards. Just survive." The referee was a man with a scarred face and no shirt. He waved them to the center. The size difference was comical. Bea looked like a child next to the butcher. The crowd jeered, placing bets. The odds were 10-1 against her. "No rules," the referee grunted. "Fight ends when one of you doesn't get up." The gate clicked shut. Bea looked at Toby. She turned to the butcher. "Kill her," Valenti shouted. The bell rang. She turned to the butcher. The bell didn't ring so much as toll a funeral knell, echoing off the rusted, corrugated metal of the meat packing plant. Inside the cage, the air was freezing, yet it smelled thick with sweat, cheap cigars, and the copper tang of old blood. Bea stood in the corner, her wrestling boots gripping the cold concrete. Across from her Avon, the butcher Volkov wasn't human. He was a wall of chemically enhanced meat. At 6'6" and nearly 300 pounds, his skin was a roadmap of prison tattoos, and his eyes were void of anything resembling a soul, just dilated black pupils fueled by a cocktail of amphetamines and rage. "Kill her," Valenti whispered from the sideline, sipping a glass of scotch. "The butcher didn't box. He didn't use technique. He simply erupted. He crossed the cage in 2 massive strides, moving with a terrifying speed that defied his size. It was like watching a grizzly bear charge. Bea instinctively slipped to the left, looking for an angle, but the cage was too small. There were no ropes to lean on, only unforgiving chain-link wire. The butcher swung a forearm the size of a tree trunk. Bea ducked, the wind of the blow ruffling the stray hairs of her braid. She fired a quick 1-2 combo to his ribs. Thud, but it was like punching a bag of wet cement. He didn't even blink. Before she could pivot away, his hand shot out and clamped around her throat. The world tilted. He lifted her off the ground as if she were a rag doll and slammed her back first into the steel mesh of the cage. Clang! The impact knocked the breath out of her. The metal diamonds of the fence dug into her skin through her rash guard, slicing into her back. Pain exploded in her spine, radiating down to her legs. The crowd roared, a baying mob hungry for violence. The butcher didn't let go. He pinned her there, grinning with rotten teeth, and pulled back a fist that looked like a sledgehammer. "Move!" her brain screamed. Bea dropped her weight, driving her knee up into his groin. It was a dirty move, a street move. The butcher grunted, his grip loosening just a fraction enough for Bea to drop to the floor and roll away. She scrambled to her feet, gasping for air. Her throat felt crushed. "Is that it?" Valenti laughed, his voice echoing in the cavernous warehouse. "Is that the legendary viper? She looks like a scared little girl." Bea looked through the mesh. She saw Toby kneeling on the dirty floor, tears streaming down his face as a gun barrel pressed against his temple. Then she saw Lorenzo. Lorenzo wasn't looking at Valenti. He was staring at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that drowned out the noise of the crowd. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. "The mechanics, Bea!" Lorenzo's voice cut through the din, sharp as a whip crack. "You can't break the wall. Take out the hinges." Flashbacks hit her: the snowy cabin, the freezing wind, Lorenzo bending a frozen branch until the joint snapped. Joints, tendons, levers. The butcher roared and charged again. This time, he didn't grab. He threw a looping overhand right intended to crush her skull. Bea didn't run. She stepped into the danger. As the massive arm swung toward her, she ducked under the armpit, closing the distance to 0. She wrapped her arms around his extended limb, trapping it against her chest. In one fluid motion, she threw her legs up, scissoring them around his torso and neck. It was a flying arm bar. For a second, they hung in the air, a grotesque dance of physics. Then, gravity took over. Bea threw her weight backward, dragging the giant down. They hit the concrete hard. Bea was on her back, the butcher on top of her, but she had his arm isolated. She bridged her hips, arching her back with every ounce of strength she possessed, pulling his arm against the natural direction of the joint. "Break!" she screamed inwardly. "Madwo!" Crack! The sound was sickening, a dry, loud snap like a gunshot. The butcher's elbow hyperextended, the bone shifting visibly under the skin. The crowd gasped. Silence rippled through the warehouse. But the butcher didn't tap out. The drugs in his system were masking the pain signals. He howled not in defeat, but in animal fury. He tried to stand up, lifting Bea with him as she still clung to his broken arm. "He's not stopping," Bea realized with horror. The giant swung his body, slamming Bea onto the concrete again to shake her off. Her head bounced off the floor, vision blurred. White lights popped in her eyes. The butcher fell to his knees, his broken arm dangling uselessly, but his good hand reached out and grabbed Bea by the hair. He dragged her face close to his. He was going to bite her face off. Bea looked into those black, drug-fueled eyes. There was no humanity there, no mercy, Lorenzo had said. "You are training for a war." Bea stopped fighting the grip. She went limp for a split second. The butcher hesitated, thinking he had won. In that microsecond of stillness, Bea brought her thumbs up. She didn't punch. She drove both thumbs deep into the butcher's eye sockets with every ounce of desperation left in her soul. The giant screamed a high, shrill sound that made the blood run cold. He released her, falling back, clawing at his face, blinded and broken. Bea rolled backward, landing on her feet. She was swaying, dizzy, blood dripping from her nose. She looked at the giant thrashing on the ground. He was trying to get up again. He was unkillable. Finish it. Bea ran. She leaped onto the chain link wall, using the mesh as a ladder, and pushed off. She launched herself into the air, driving her elbow down like a spear tip. She landed with her full body weight on the back of the butcher's neck. His face slammed into the concrete. His body went rigid, then limp. He didn't move again. Bea stood over him, her chest heaving like a bellows. She wiped the blood from her lip and turned to the wire. She locked eyes with Valenti. "I won," she rasped, her voice raw. "Let him go." Valenti stood up slowly. His face twisted into a snarl of pure malice. He looked at his fallen champion, then at the millions of dollars he had just lost in bets. He looked at the disrespect shown by a waitress. "You think this is the game?" Valenti spat. He turned to the guards holding Toby. "Kill them. Kill the boy. Kill the boar. Kill them all." The guard behind Toby cocked his pistol. Bea screamed, throwing herself against the cage wire, uselessly trying to claw through. No. Bang. Bang. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. But Toby didn't fall. The guard behind him dropped, a neat hole in his forehead. Chaos erupted. From the shadows of the warehouse rafters, muzzle flashes lit up the dark. Dominic and Rocco, positioned hours ago, opened fire with suppressed submachine guns. Now, Lorenzo roared. He didn't run for cover, he ran for the cage. He pulled a heavy revolver from his tuxedo jacket and fired 2 shots at the padlock on the gate door. The lock shattered. He kicked the door open and rushed in. "Bay!" She stumbled toward him, her legs finally giving out. Lorenzo caught her, wrapping one arm around her waist, his other hand raising the revolver to fire at Valenti's men who were returning fire from the catwalks. "Toby!" she cried, pointing. "Rocco has him. Move the warehouse dissolved into a war zone." Bullets sparked off the concrete floor and pinged against the metal cage. Lorenzo shielded Bea with his own body, dragging her out of the kill box. They sprinted through the labyrinth of hanging meat hooks and machinery. "Exit is clear." Dominic's voice crackled over Lorenzo's earpiece. They burst out through the rear loading bay into the biting Chicago winter night. The cold air burned Bea's lungs. A convoy of 3 black armored SUVs screeched to a halt in front of them. The doors flew open. Rocco was already shoving a sobbing, shaking Toby into the back seat of the lead vehicle. "Get in!" Lorenzo practically threw Bea into the car, diving in after her as a spray of bullets shattered the rear windshield. "Go! Go! Go!" The driver slammed on the gas. The SUVs peeled out, tires smoking, leaving the meatpacking plant and Valenti's crumbling empire in the rearview mirror. Lorenzo pulled Bea into his chest. She buried her face in his jacket, smelling the gunpowder and the expensive cologne, shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline crash hit her. "You did it," he whispered into her hair, kissing the top of her head fiercely. "It's over, Beatrix. You did it." 3 months later, the sun over Sicily was different than the sun in Chicago. It was warmer, heavier smelling of lemons and salt spray. The villa sat on a cliff overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea, a fortress of white stone and bougainvillea. It was quiet here. No sirens, no gunfire. Bea sat on the terrace, a cup of espresso in her hand. The bruises had faded long ago, though a thin white scar cut through her left eyebrow, a permanent souvenir from the butcher. She wore a simple white sundress, her hair loose and wavy in the breeze. Down on the private beach, she could see Toby laughing. He was trying to launch a kite with Dominic, who looked ridiculous in shorts but seemed surprisingly happy to be off duty. The glass door behind her slid open. Lorenzo stepped out. He looked younger. The perpetual tension that used to tighten his jaw was gone. He wore a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the tattoos on his forearms. He carried a tablet. "News from the States," Lorenzo said, sitting opposite her. "Good or bad?" Bea asked, not looking away from the sea. "Final," Lorenzo replied. "The commission voted last night. After the embarrassment at the factory, Valenti lost his backing. He tried to run to Mexico, but the cartels don't like failures. They found him in Tijuana." "So he's gone," Bea said softly. "He's gone," Bea said softly. "He's gone. The war is over." Lorenzo set the tablet down. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His skin was warm, his grip solid. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that used to terrify her but now felt like home. "We have the shipping routes now. We have the money. You don't have to stay here, Bea. You could go back. Open that gym you talked about. Be a legitimate trainer." Bea turned her gaze from the ocean to him. She looked at the man who had kidnapped her, threatened her, saved her, and empowered her. She thought about the rush of the fight, the intoxicating weight of power, and the fierce, twisted loyalty of the world she now ruled beside him. She thought about the normal life of a waitress, scraping gum off tables. A slow smile spread across her face, dangerous and beautiful. "Go back?" she mused, turning her hand over to interlace her fingers with his. "And leave you unsupervised? You'd start a war within a week." Lorenzo chuckled, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You're probably right. Besides," Bea said, leaning forward, her eyes flashing with the spirit of the viper, "a normal life sounds boring. I think I like being the queen better." Lorenzo leaned in, capturing her lips in espresso and victory. "Then long live the queen," he whispered against her mouth. They sat there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The waitress and the mafia boss, the viper and the lion, that had fought the world, broken the rules, and rewritten their destiny in blood. And God help anyone who dared to challenge them now. What a ride! From a diner waitress scraping gum off tables to the queen of the underworld, Bea proved that you should never judge a book by its cover or a waitress by her apron. Lorenzo thought he was hunting a lamb, but he ended up falling in love with a lioness. If you enjoyed this story of grit, betrayal, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. What do you think happened to Valenti in Mexico? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.